Welcome everybody. My name's Brittany Quickwarner. I'm the president and CEO at the Eugene Area Chamber of Commerce, and we are here with Pablo Valentine of Hirschner Hunter and Tim Campbell of Campbell Commercial Real Estate. This is our Committed to Community webinar series that we started a couple weeks ago. This is our 9th episode of this, and we've been super lucky to be joined by experts from across the community who are able to answer some of the most common questions that we've been getting from the business community. We have been in contact with hundreds, if not actually probably thousands of businesses across the community over the last couple weeks. And as I'm sure you guys are all aware, folks have lots of questions. There's so many things happening and changing right now. And one of the big ones that folks were asking about were their commercial leases, residential leases as well. But from a business perspective, what are folks doing to manage their rents and paying for their properties when they don't necessarily have income coming in? And so Pablo is going to talk a little bit about some of the legal rulings that have been that have kind of come down around this area, and then Tim and Pablo are both going to be able to share with us some best practices and just some tips on navigating your lease. And then we have a opportunity to open it up for questions. So if you're on Facebook or if you're on the Zoom call, please feel free to type your questions into the comments, and we'll make sure to try to get them answered. So I will, at that, turn it over to Pablo and let you guys take it from here.
Great, thanks, Brittany. So again, I'm Pablo Valentine. I'm an attorney at Hirschner Hunter. I do a lot of commercial real estate, leasing, and other aspects, and very happy that Tim was gracious enough to join. I'm going to give sort of a legal perspective on what's happening now, and Tim's going to hopefully give us a really on-the-ground market perspective of what he's seeing, because he sees a lot. And so first I'll say the lawyerly thing. I'm not giving you legal advice. I'm not your lawyer just because I'm presenting on a webinar. But obviously, if we are your clients, give a call if you have questions, and happy to help people out. So I'm just going to start off. I'll keep this pretty brief. I don't want it to be boring, but just a little brief overview of what the lay of the land looked like, maybe a few months ago on a legal level, and how things have changed recently. Back in, a month or so ago, if you didn't pay your lease and you didn't pay your rent, then the landlord could send you a notice and terminate your lease, and then go to court if you didn't move out and FED you and maybe move in and lock you out. That was the very basic premise of how leases work. Not that long ago, the governor put out an executive order 2013, which radically changed that legal landscape. It essentially put a 90-day moratorium on taking any action to either terminate a commercial lease or evict somebody from a commercial space for non-payment of rent. And it's similar to what happened in the residential sphere, but it's a little bit different. The first way that it's really quite a bit different, in fact, is if you're a tenant, you need to go to your landlord and give them some sort of proof that you have been affected by this COVID-19 crisis, and that your non-payment is caused at least in part by that situation. The executive order doesn't say what you need to give, but I think most of us are interpreting that as a fairly low bar. And all you need to do is get them something, financial statements, maybe a certified statement. I really don't necessarily know what. Again, I think most landlords understand that a lot of people are affected by this. But legally, I think it's a low bar to get something to your landlord. And in theory, you have 30 days after the rent was due. Not entirely sure what that means. It doesn't match up well with normal lease time frames, but let's just say your April rent was due April 1. Well, by the end of this month, you should be getting something to your landlord if you're trying to take advantage of this executive order. Let's say the rent was April 1. What would happen is if you get them that, they can't send you a notice of terminating your lease for non-payment. Mm-hmm. They can't file an FED in court. They can't lock you out. They can't otherwise do anything to disrupt your right to possession of the premises for the next 90 days. It also purports to waive any late fees or other penalties that would be involved with non-payment of rent. The order is a little unclear on that, but I think that's pretty clearly the intent. The language is not great. But it also makes very clear that your rent is not waived during that period. So the fact that you haven't paid in April doesn't mean your April rent is not due.
Right.
That obligation is still standing out there. And so one of the big questions on a purely practical level is, what would happen after these 90 days? If you just stop paying your rent, send in the required information, after 90 days, you're going to have 90 days worth of rent due, plus, of course, that next month's rent.
Yeah.
If you haven't been able to generate income over these next 3 months, that's going to be a big chunk. And I think people are seeing that a lot with the mortgage forbearance issues, the laws out there. So how does that work? How do you manage that cash flow? And it also requires you it has this very generic language. You have to at least notify your landlord if you're taking advantage of this, and to pay what you can pay. Again, really unclear what that means, but it is a good idea, again, with this idea of there's this big chunk coming up soon, to keep that coming down. As I read the order, it doesn't apply to applying security deposits. So if you, for example, if you don't pay April rent, I think a landlord could apply your security deposit if they've kept it segregated, to kind of manage their own cash flow. The order would apply if the landlord came and said, okay, you need to replenish your security deposit. You could say, well, I can't do that because of the crisis. That's a non-payment situation. So that might be a way for certain, again, a lot of landlords commingle that security deposit with their own funds anyway. So it's probably already gone. But if they do keep it segregated, that might be a way to help kind of manage some cash flow on their side. And of course, on the landlord side, they typically aren't getting any of their, mortgage payments, utility payments, maintenance people. They got to keep on paying those things. So they have a cash flow issue on their side. And that's something to keep in mind with all of this, is this shouldn't be viewed as a us or them situation, but it's we're all in this situation together.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And even beyond this executive order, the Chief Justice of the Oregon Supreme Court has pretty much shut down all trials. So even if the executive order were to allow somebody to go through and file an FED or terminate a lease, nothing's really happening in the courts right now. And that's mainly a social distancing situation where Chief Justice doesn't want a bunch of people showing up in court where there's jurors. There are certain essential functions that need to continue happening, and particularly criminal trials or other people that have a constitutional right to a jury trial. So there are people in the courthouse still, and they want to make sure that it's staying as able to keep the social distancing as much as possible. So even without this executive order, there wasn't a lot you could do, except for you could have maybe done a lockout. Now, Tim can talk to this a little bit more. I think it's the foolish landlord that gets rid of their tenant right now, because I don't know that there's many people looking for spaces. So really, this is, I think, a situation of talking with your landlord, negotiating something that makes sense for everyone, to try and create a situation that you can weather, the landlord can weather, and maintains that relationship, because hopefully everyone's thinking about this as a long-term endeavor. If you're taking advantage of this 90-day order just to stop paying, but you'd really have some ability to pay, or you have some way to weather it, and the landlord figures that out, that is not going to do anything good for that relationship with your landlord, and that can be a really tough situation to navigate. I also wanted to remind people there are these SBA programs. I know everyone's heard of them now, the Paycheck Protection Program, and then the emergency economic injury disaster loans. Mm-hmm. The Paycheck Protection Program, a reminder, 25% of those loan proceeds can be used for non-payroll related expenses, including paying rent. And that can be one of the forgivable expenses. So one thing to keep in mind is if you're negotiating with your landlord on a rent reduction, well, if you're getting a PPP loan, maybe you don't want a rent reduction, because that's some of the money that can get forgiven if you're not otherwise, you need to look at cash flow. That's obviously the most important, but something to keep in mind, that if the federal government's going to be paying that money, maybe the deferral comes later, or you guys could weather this for a little bit longer. So, and of course, the other thing that I'm not really sure about is what's happening with utilities. I know their utility companies are working with residential companies, at least as Tim mentioned, and but I haven't heard anything on working with commercial or other businesses, but I don't know if that's in the works or not. I'd be interested in that. So that's sort of the legal overview of what's happening right now. Tim, I'll let you talk a little bit about what you're seeing in the market and what landlords are doing and what tenants are doing.
Sure. Yeah. We have, to date, we've had 120 different tenants ask for rent relief or some kind of workout.
Wow.
And we have been just negotiating against ourselves for over a month now on rent reductions and workouts. So starting from the start of this thing, where there was a lot of unknown, and probably 80% of tenants that called and were talking to landlords were asking, they didn't know what they were asking for, but they knew they were scared something was wrong. We've gotten a lot of emails and letters of tenants that want to work something out. Now that the PPP programs come through, they're applying for it or have applied for it. They're getting a loan number attached to it, and then they're calling us and working with us on it. But we have been working daily, trying to get 5 a day done in some kind of amendment to their lease, special amendment to their lease of workout based on the type of tenant they are, who they are, and each case is so different because a lot of them are small businesses that are family owned, that they don't have the means and they need all the help they can get, to the large corporations that you're getting a form letter, and it's called Dear Landlord, and they're asking for free rent across the board till this is over, and you're going to have to negotiate with them as well. So one of the steps that we're taking is we're being counselors, pointing them to the PPP programs, having them talk with their bankers and their legal representatives, and how can you make it work on that side, because you got to help yourself too. And then we're working out on how we can amend their lease to at least help out. We have to also educate them that the landlord isn't the person with all the deep pockets, and it's not the landlord's fault. That the landlord's in a difficult position too, because they have debt obligations, and if there's not enough rent coming in, the landlord probably can't make that mortgage payment, so they're going to have to go talk to their bank as well. So we've brought in every single landlord that owns a building, and they're key decision makers in this process as well. And it absolutely has to be that way. We have landlords that are in their 80s that live off of the income, and once this started hitting, they had to be educated on what was really happening, and brought into the process. And a lot of landlords that we manage for are very passive landlords. They just go to the mailbox and want their checks each month. And now that this has happened, they've become more educated, more involved, and they're talking with their bankers, they're talking with their attorneys, and everybody, like you said, everybody is working together. We're all in this together. So it helps that communication is clear, and everybody's trying to get to the same outcome, which is helping each other so that tenants can remain, and landlords can pay their mortgage, because last thing a landlord wants right now is vacant space, because there's nobody looking for vacant space right now for at least a couple more months. So
Yeah.
it's a lot of triage. Feel like I'm in a boat with 5 holes in it and 1 bucket, but everybody's doing the best we can, and across the board. I mean, tenants are even doing the best they can too.
Yeah. Tim, I know that you both own some properties and then obviously manage for other property owners. Have you had any luck on the properties that you own working with the banks on your mortgages? And Pablo, to you too, do you know of any sort of, it's kind of a chain, right? And so if we're addressing the part of the chain, which is the commercial leases, but we're not addressing the landlords who then have to pay their mortgage, it's going to be broken there. Is there conversation about that? I know we're talking at the federal level and really pushing our delegates hard to say, look, you got to have some relief on the banks in order to be offering some breaks for the landlords. I'm just curious, Tim, if you've had any luck with that.
Yes. So April 1st, April 10th, today's the date where rents are late in commercial world, starting the 11th. So we've been assessing every rent check that comes in. I mean, I've never seen, it's like Christmas when the mail comes, everybody's opening up looking, okay, we got a check, and mark that one off our list. But we have been talking to banks, like some of our clients, where they bank, seeing what kind of programs they have, and getting them ready for it. And one thing I did a couple weeks ago is I sent banks that our clients have loans with, and listed properties that they have loans with, and said, this one's going to be okay, this one's going to be okay, this one we might be coming to you to talk to. Just getting them ready for it, and urging our clients that manage their own banking process to do the same, because communication is going to be key. And with the PPP loans coming through, bankers have kind of spent 110% of their time on that part, and normal lending and everything's kind of gone by the wayside. So now that these mortgage payments could get skipped or might get skipped, they're going to have to start paying attention to this as well. But earlier communication, the better, and that's what we've been doing.
Yeah.
And something similar. I haven't necessarily talked to many landlords that I know are talking to banks. Few that I have talked to said, right, kind of like what Tim said, really hard to get a banker's attention right now. They've got so much else going on. But I agree, you want to get in there early, because what you don't want to do is get into a default situation and then start talking to them. You want to get ahead of the curve, just like a tenant wants to get ahead of talking to their landlord. One thing to keep in mind too, that those PPP loans are generally not available to landlords, because landlords are just they tend to be a passive, they're not a trader business, so they don't have payroll, they don't have those other things that would get covered by a PPP loan. They might be able to get those economic injury disaster loans, I believe, but still borrowing money just to pay your borrowed money doesn't, you're just digging one hole to fill in the other. So it's worth, talking with your banker to see what sort of solutions are out there.
Yeah. So we have a couple questions already coming in. If you don't mind, I might pivot to some of these, and then I'm sure it'll take us down other rabbit holes that you guys can navigate. So one person says, I'm an owner of a business specifically mandated to close by executive order. The issues that I'm having is that my landlord is not communicating with me. They don't return calls or emails. I started reaching out to them before the mandated closure. My revenue is way down and I can't use my space for my business. I do need a break on rent to make it through this. What happens if the landlord's not communicating, even though they're communicating with other tenants?
Well, that's unusual.
Yeah, so like a one-off situation, hopefully, but.
Right. If they are communicating with other tenants, then number one would be, again, maybe go talk to your other tenants and say, what is the landlord saying to you?
Yeah.
And maybe in particular, hey, if you talk to your landlord, can you ask them why they're not talking to me?
Call me. Yeah.
Yeah. Ultimately, though, I think what you're talking about is why this executive order is in place. If there's a landlord that is not communicating, you don't have to pay rent as long as you comply with the executive order. Sure, there's going to be a big bill coming due, but maybe try and get one of those PPP loans or other economic injury disaster loan.
Mhm.
So you have the ability to pay that lump sum or pay the rent now. I mean, but you have at least 90 days now to try and figure something out. Really tough situation. And, that's a lot of what's going on here are these really tough situations. And
Yeah. So I guess I would, also am not qualified to give legal advice, but what I heard you say in the beginning was that in order for you to essentially get this 90-day kind of moratorium, you have to proactively reach out to your landlord and tell them that you need some sort of break. So
yeah,
I assume
you
it's
do have to provide documentation
right.
to show it, which is not hard if you're a mandatory, if your business is mandated to close.
Yeah, exactly. So making sure that even if they're not communicating back, that you can document that you did reach out to them, that you had, here's this email that I sent to the email address that I know to be their email, and here's what I documented. I'm assuming as a business owner, that's you covering your bases. Does that seem right, Pablo?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And again, if you want the executive order, you can just Google Oregon Executive Order 20-13. Look through again, make sure you're taking the steps that are necessary. But the big important one is that you do have to get that documentation to your landlord showing. And again, it's documentation or other evidence that non-payment is caused by, in whole or in part, directly or indirectly, the COVID-19 pandemic. And again, I think a mandatory closure order is exactly the kind of thing that we're talking about. That's caused by this pandemic. It's maybe not that you have coronavirus yourself, but that you're mandated to be closed because the pandemic is going through. So
Right.
get that documentation in, maybe even send certified mail. Interestingly enough, just as an aside, the Postal Service has changed how they do certified mail now. They're not making people sign certified mail. The postal carrier themselves they'll sign that they delivered something because of course they don't want somebody signing it and then giving that back to the carrier. So it just goes to show this pandemic affects all walks of life in every different way. So yeah, make sure you're dotting your I's and crossing your T's there. Tim?
Yeah, one of the things we've been doing as a management company is when we first get contacted by a tenant, we send out a statement. And the statement's basically, we hear you. We will get back to you in April sometime. We want to assess to see how this is going because it's been changing daily.
Yeah.
And we list of here's some avenues for you to check, like the PPP loans, the process. Please contact your banker if you haven't done this already.
Mm-hmm.
And then we put them in the pile, and then we're going through and answering tenants. And so where they get the initial statement, we're now getting back to them and starting workout programs and all that, just depending.
Yeah, Tim, when you and I talked earlier this week, and it seems like this is a no-brainer, but you did say that the folks who are compassionate and nice and patient and working with their property management companies and or their landlords are going to do better off in this situation. So
yeah, and the more they know about the programs, the more knowledgeable they are and more rational. And I mean, it's very emotional out there right now. There's a lot of fear, but yeah, we have a nice pile and a not so nice pile, and but we got to get to everybody because eventually we'll have to. And so we're trying. A lot of the management companies don't have 100 people working for them either. Right. They only have like 5 or 6 people to handle 100 to 150 requests. And a lot of these they want answers right away. And the internet has made that possible. So it's hard to get answers right away when you have to take every tenant's request, look to see if, are they in arrears already? You know,
Mhm.
are they up to date in their rent payments? And pull their lease out, and then, you know, try to help them out that way.
Another question, a couple questions came through. For Pablo, would it be okay to tell commercial tenants to just pay what they can, or is it better to negotiate a formal agreement or deferment?
Well, probably shocking coming from a lawyer, but I would always document what the deal is. And that just prevents confusion down the road. And it also, I mean, I think just ensures that everyone does know what the deal is. I mean, in the first instance, let's just make sure that, you know, if you say one thing on the phone, a tenant hears something else. Everything I've helped with has been a formal lease amendment. I have sort of a basic form that I've used a number of times. We can just fill in the gaps. Tim can speak to this too, but, you know, a lot of what we're seeing is a partial rent deferral for
Mhm.
certain months, repaid over then a certain period of time after that deferral is done, with triple net or CAM charges continue to get paid during that time. But that, of course, is that those are for those tenants that still have some ability to pay. And I just don't know the folks. I haven't had to deal with anybody that really has a tenant that just can't pay. And
Yeah.
Tim, I know Tim's seen something similar. Yeah.
Yeah, our best deals have been probably half rents for 2 or 3 months, and then working out where the tenant pays it back after uh, November and December. And these are tenants that, you know, probably are a little more secure than some of the other smaller tenants, but they want to get it off their books in 2020, just like the landlords do too. The funny one, I mean, here's a prime example, is we got a check in the mail from a tenant. They're a national tenant, and the check was for $3,011, and their rent was 24,000 some dollars. And we couldn't even figure it out. There wasn't a letter. They didn't ask for anything. They haven't talked to us, and they shut their ACH down and mailed the letter. And so it was kind of a surprise to us. So we've had to reach out saying, "Hey, what is this for?" You know, I mean, but it's their way of saying that here's what we're going to pay. We'll talk to you when this thing's over.
Yeah.
Being a national tenant, they've actually been on the local news because they've had lines outside of their place, and you know, they're open, they're doing well. So you know, we deal with that. But the best thing is to talk to your landlord or send a letter right away saying, "Hey, I'm in this with you. Here's what I can afford, but I like to work it out. And if I get my SBA money, then I'll pay you rent."
Tim, what's an example? So say you're a business owner listening in here and you're trying to figure out how to negotiate this. What's a good sort of plan that you've worked out with somebody that is working well for them and for you?
That would be the partial rent or half rent for the, you know, April, May, or May and June, and then paid back in November, December, because that way at least the landlord can calculate mortgage payments and CAM charges, and, you know, make paying expenses. And
Yeah.
that's probably the best scenario.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
or paying that rent back over a certain period of time, like Pablo mentioned, if they're a smaller tenant, or when they get their SBA money, whichever sooner, you know.
So someone asked, are you charging interest on those repayments? Pablo, is that something that in the executive order, it mandates that you can't, am I right, that you can't charge fees or interest?
Yeah, and the one question I have, so I'll just say on a market level, I'm not seeing people charge interest. The executive order only says you can't charge late fees or other penalties. So that's certainly one question we've had in the office. Well, does interest accruing on this unpaid rent, is that another penalty or not? Just don't know. But again, for tenants that are working with their landlords, we're not seeing landlords charge interest. That they're, whenever the rent's being paid back, is just a pro rata payback. The other thing I've heard of, I haven't done one myself, but if somebody really needs just a pure rent deferral, one option sometimes, depending on the lease and the lease term, is to just extend the term of the lease. So it gets added onto the back end. That still leaves a gap for the landlord during those times of non-payment. I mean, they're going to get the money, eventually, but that is another option that I've heard bandied around.
Yeah. Someone asked, would it be best at this point for landlords to provide deferments in grouped months or just apply them on a monthly basis? They ask because most of our commercial tenants are asking for deferment for April, May, and June. Considering everything seems to change daily, would it be best to just take it 1 month at a time?
That's going to be a real personalized situation. And I guess that's what Tim is going to say too. I mean, in some ways it depends on how much active management you want to do with your tenants. Of course, how much comfort, tenants need in the situation. I mean, one of the things, and Tim can talk about this, one of the things you're doing by giving these rent deferrals is not just the pure, not just the pure cash, but sort of the confidence that a tenant has to say, okay, I think I might be able to weather this out. I'm going to feel better about the situation. I feel like I'm able to work with my landlord, and I feel like I can do it. Whereas if they don't have that confidence, that could be a big thing in how you manage it. And even whether you say, I'm going to keep on trying to weather through this, or I'm just throwing in the towel, I can't do this. So that's something to think about with any of these factors.
Yeah, we for our sanity, we've been wanting to get the deferment out over multiple months so that we don't have to worry about that particular tenant anymore until we get down the road, and that's settled through an amendment to the lease so that everybody's mind is at ease. If I had to do this again next month for every tenant, I think I would go find another profession. But it's that the more you can negotiate now up front, I think the better off you'll be in the long term. And especially the more tenants you have. I know I can see there's some management companies on here in the crowd that they have probably just as many as us or more. And to do this every month would just be awful.
Yeah. Well, and from the business owner's perspective too, I imagine that at least having a little bit of security, knowing, okay, for the next 3 months, here's what I know I can pay. Here's what, here's what you're going to be expecting from me. I imagine that on both sides, at least the certainty of it is what I'm hearing from a lot of businesses is the most frustrating part about this specific disaster, is that it's far more uncertain on the end date of it.
Right. And when the PPP money comes in, like Pablo said, a certain percentage of that can be used for rent, then they have peace of mind they can pay rent. Landlords have peace of mind they're getting that rent.
Yeah. In that, I guess on that note, so the PPP money, the SBA, EIDL loans, most folks haven't seen that come through yet, right? And we're hearing it could still be a few weeks out. Do you recommend folks contacting you now so you at least have an idea, and then coming back around and renegotiating if and when they do get those funds? Do you recommend kind of having both conversations, or are you just saying wait until you get it and then we'll figure it out?
For those that we don't have agreements with in place?
Yeah.
Well, I think if they get it, they have the time clock starts when they get their application number back, and so they've got to spend it in that time period. So if they have to spend it for rent in that time period of 2.5 months, then we're going to get that rent if they're a tenant of ours. But so if not, then I have a feeling if they spend the money to buy clothes or a car or something like that, a couple of years down the road, auditing will happen, and they'll have to pay that penalty. It's a trust factor right now, so that's what everybody's kind of going off of.
Yeah.
The amendment says everything. So the sooner a tenant can talk to a landlord, sooner a landlord can talk to a tenant and get that ironed out, the better off everybody's going to be.
Yeah.
Hey, Tim, I'm wondering, do you actually mention specifically the SBA loans in your amendment, or is that just a conversation you have with the tenant?
It's our conversation that we have with the tenant. Yeah. It's in our initial response. We send them to the links that the state has, the state website. Just trying to counsel them to give them more information, you know, not be an authoritative figure on it because changes every day and we don't know what we're doing on that regard, but just to help them.
Yeah. Well, and we don't address it either. I think it's something to keep in mind for tenants is to think about that as, because one question they're always going to have is, I mean, the PPP has a 1% interest rate. So it's really good, cheap money. And sure, it would be great to use it in a way that gives you that forgiveness. But sometimes you do have to be thinking about, too, what are your capital needs going to be? When Tim and I were preparing for this, we talked a little bit about, say, food, restaurants. Restaurants tend not to have a lot of capital, but when this thing gets over and they've got to ramp up again, all of their inventory is going to be likely spoiled or gone. And they're going to have a lot of food purchases they're going to need to make on a really tight market because the food supply is restricting. Do they need to keep, if they get a PPP loan, do they need to keep some of that, to spend on that, even though it's not going to, forgiveness is a great thing, but you need cash to make some money sometimes too. So I can see some businesses are going to have some really, think really hard about this and maybe make some really difficult choices about what is the best of two bad choices, or you have a good choice, but you maybe need to sacrifice a little bit. So it's tough.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. The feedback we've heard from a handful of restaurant or coffee shop or whatever owners is that the PPP loan is great, but 8 weeks, we don't even know if we'll be back open yet at that point. So to pay payroll for my staff to sit at home doesn't really help my business out as much. Obviously, it's supporting their staff, which we want to make sure that folks are doing as well. But to your point, Pablo, it might be more than 8 weeks before someone's going to be making that large food purchase to get things going again. So I think that's a good reminder that PPP money doesn't have to be spent within 8 weeks. Just if you spend it outside of that, that's the portion that you'll be paying interest on and not necessarily getting forgiven.
That's right. And there is still a 75% requirement on payroll, but again, that could be outside that 8 weeks. So yeah, absolutely.
So Cheryl says, can a demand note be used for the deferred rent amount versus an amendment?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, if you want to. I mean, again, just spell out what the repayment is and probably want to make reference. I mean, the tenant probably wants some reference to know that by not paying the lease, that payment obligation is encompassed in the note, so that, they, and again, I think tenants and landlords that are working together are going to trust each other. But we've still got to remember all of life still happens.
Yeah.
You make that deal with the landlord that is just encompassed in a promissory note that doesn't have any references, and then the landlord passes away. The heirs come along and say, well, I have to see a promissory note and I see you didn't pay rent. Oh, yeah, it looks like you owe me some double money there or something like that. So just, again, document how things work out so that it's all clear down the road in 2, 3, 4, 5 months, whenever it is.
Yeah, I think that's super important, obviously, on both sides, right? You never know what's going to happen. And, make sure to get it all written out, right? What are the terms on this deferred money? Is it going to, you say that market is showing that folks aren't charging interest on those late fees, or on those late payments. Get that all in writing so you both are just in the clear for what it is you're expecting out of each other.
That's right.
Someone says, if a tenant has a lease that expires in July, does not want to sign an extension at this point, what's the best approach for repayment and deferments for those folks? That's some bad timing.
That is some bad timing.
Yeah.
Gosh, I'll be interested on Tim's comments. I guess my initial thought is it would be really hard. I mean, that in particular might be where a promissory note could be very useful because you're not going to have a lease supporting that anymore. But I guess one question is really what is going on there? If they want a deferment, but the lease ends in July, does that mean they are planning on moving out in July? It seems like there's going to be a lot of conversation there about what what really is supposed to be happening there. What does the tenant want to do? Are they saying, hey, we want to try and whether we want to extend if we can, or they're just saying we're not going to extend, but we still want some rent deferral. I mean, keep in mind the rent's still due, and a landlord can always just forbear in taking any action. I mean, again, right now there's not much they can do anyway. Yeah, that's a tough one. I think that requires some creativity and some real heart-to-heart discussion about what those two want to do.
Yeah.
Tim?
Yeah, I've actually been lucky over the last month. We've renewed 3 tenants who were in this situation.
Wow.
And so to give them a deferral or workout, they've renewed their lease for, a 5-year period or something. I'll use an example. The movie theater in Florence, single operator, has, shut down the whole cinema, and he doesn't have a year's worth of income behind him. We worked with him, and he said, I just can't pay it, and I'm not going to renew my lease. And the last time this happened to us, we had to go on a national search to find this guy to run a theater in Florence. And he started talking to his banker. He started listening to the news. He started researching the programs. He came back, and we're giving him a deferral if he renews his lease. When this is all over, we're starting his new, rent program. So it's turning out it's going to work out as a win-win scenario. The whole town of Florence is behind him. He's a needed, asset for the community. And so we're fortunate enough we have a landlord that owns that center that really wants to keep him, really wants to work with him. And so we're finding a way to make it work.
That's great. Thanks, Tim. So what do I do if I'm a tenant? And Pablo, I don't know if you can speak to the residential side at all in this. We saw a note pop up in one of the Facebook pages that a property management company still sending out eviction notices. What do I do if I'm a tenant and I get that letter that says, hey, you're past due and we're going to evict you? Legally, right. I'm just curious what a tenant's rights are.
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting one. Similar to the commercial side, the residential side has this basically complete ban on terminations or evictions. Residential, there is no requirement that you get in touch with your landlord, even say this is a COVID related situation. There's just a complete ban on it. Mm-hmm. But on the listservs, the legal listservs, there's been some questions about that. Hey, there are some landlords that are persistent in that. So there's a couple of things, and I'll start with the heavy one first. Number one, violation of the governor's order is a misdemeanor. And so the cops could come out, issue, obviously tell you to stop it, but they could issue a citation or, potentially even arrest you, I guess. I would highly doubt they would do that, but, they certainly could give you a citation for it. And, if this is coming from a property manager, I am quite sure that is violating their duties to the landlord and to follow the law. So could go against their license. So that is probably also very heavy against them. Mm-hmm. But, stepping back from the heavy hand that is involved, I think what you could do is you just got to get in touch with the property management company and say, look, these are still coming out. I mean, maybe you assume good faith first. You guys seem to be making a mistake here in sending these out. I don't know if you have something automated or if you're just on auto, but you're sending these out. There's this governor's order that says you can't do this. Can you get that fixed? And you would hope that most people would say, oh my gosh, thank you for letting me know, and would be appreciative of that. Maybe I'm an optimist for a lawyer, but I really hope so. In addition, you could always you could try and contact a lawyer. There's not a lot of tenant side lawyers out there, but there are some. But legal aid, John Van Landingham locally is really highly involved in the efforts that are going on here. Or you tell the property management company, you say, hey, maybe you should be talking to your lawyer because you seem to not know what's going on, and make sure that they're getting themselves educated. So I think you got a couple of different pathways to try and work with it. But
yeah, one of my
and one thing,
thoughts, go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say, one thing to keep in mind too is the eviction, the moratorium on evictions or terminations are based on non-payment. So, another thing to keep in mind is sometimes these notices are still coming out because they're not based on a non-payment situation. There could be another situation going on there. And in particular, I don't know if this is somebody that was, being affected firsthand, or they're hearing things kind of down the pipe, but it could be that there's other situations going on. And you hear there's a lot of really hard luck stories about people that are not, say old folks that have rumors, by rumors, not a RU, but ROOM, somebody who lives with them, but are not complying with social distancing. So they go out, they, interact with lots of people in society, and they come back to the house and they're living with somebody that has a compromised situation. And so that's just not good. So there's that's the trouble with any of these kind of broad brush situations, is there's lots of nuance that can happen down in lots of detail that really informs you of what is going on. So
yeah, one of my initial kind of thoughts, and I tend to be an optimist as well with you, Pablo, is kind of giving folks a benefit of the doubt right now, and that maybe there is an automated process that some of these property managers have implemented that just hasn't gotten fixed yet, right? All of this is happening so quickly to everybody. So to reach out to them and say, look, I got this. This is obviously an error, but using, compassion and kindness as much as possible on both sides. Because I think that the biggest thing that I've heard through all of this is that we're in it together. Nobody was expecting this. It's nobody's fault. And everybody's got an obligation, financial or otherwise, whether you're a tenant or a landlord or a property owner or whatever. Yeah, that's too bad if those letters are still going out though.
Yeah, and it's also possible too. The mail is actually seem to be going pretty well, but that doesn't mean we are seeing delays. That a notice went out before this came out, and it just finally is making its way to the tenant too. So maybe take a look at the date on things. And
another question, and this is one that I fear is maybe going to be happening more than not. What about businesses that aren't going to reopen again? Folks who have 5-year leases, who, they aren't going to be able to weather this storm for the next 30, 60, 90 days, and then they end up just closing as a business. What are some of the options that both landlords and tenants have in that situation?
Not a lot of good ones.
Yeah.
I mean, realistically, if a business is not going to be able to weather this storm, I mean, in all likelihood, a lot of commercial leases are set up to have a personal guarantee by the owners, but in all likelihood, there's no assets behind there if the business is closing. So for the landlord, it's likely going to be a situation of non-payment, and you don't expect that lease term is going to be fulfilled. And one question I'll have for Tim is, what do you think the market's going to look like for the next year or two? And for the tenant side, ultimately, it's again working with your landlord, being proactive ahead of time. There are a lot of sympathetic landlords. Maybe there is a way to be able to negotiate with them and say, hey, here's what I can pay now. Let's figure out how to make this work, cut the lease early. And short of that, I assume we'll start seeing a spike in bankruptcies here soon as well. And that's unfortunately that you might have to go down that route, but bankruptcy can be a really good option for people at times if they're just swimming in debt. So.
Yeah, I think that just because we can go back out and congregate in businesses doesn't mean that our economy is going to get better overnight soon. I think this is a long-term recovery, especially for small towns like Eugene and small tenants that make up of Eugene. So my gut says that we're going to be in this for a year or two to totally get out of it, where tenants are, healthy again and paying rent. My attrition rate I'm guessing it's going to be 20 to 25% of tenants are not going to make it, and these are smaller tenants, national tenants too.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, we got to wait to see, because right now everybody's trying to put a Band-Aid on everything, but the long-term effects of it will come, 6 months down the road.
Yeah. Tim, from your perspective, and because you have such a diverse kind of set of tenants, and without calling anybody out specifically, the tenants that we all kind of hear about that we're thinking are struggling through this are going to be our restaurants, our bars, our retailers. Do you have any other tenants who are kind of, that sort of surprised you that this is having an impact on them, that, just are interesting to think about? Because I think that that's one of the things is that there's the obvious ones. And then I've heard stories from businesses where I'm like, gosh, yeah, like that would impact you. And I wouldn't think about it.
Yeah, the dental community has been hit very hard because they've been mandated to shut down through June. And so everybody thinks, hey, it's a dentist, they can withstand this, it's a vacation for them. Well, that's not the case. I mean, a lot of them are that had to lay their staff off, or some of them are paying them, but they can't pay them that long, and they're dipping into their personal savings, and their 401ks are down, and the stock market's down. I mean, it's horrible for them too. That was a surprise at first, but the governor made that happen. So, that there's a cause and effect there. Some of the law firms that are tenants of ours, I've been surprised at them coming and asking for rent reductions and showing that they're not as, they need some help too. So I think it's everything and everybody.
Right. Yeah, I mean, sometimes law firms in particular, if they're really dependent on the courts and the courts are shut down, it just means all of a sudden you can't do any of the in-person stuff, depositions, hearings. So I've not necessarily heard any of that firsthand, but that doesn't surprise me too much. I think anything you look at, you look at the mandatory closure list, probably a lot of small gyms, right? A lot of times they're just really hand to mouth, especially if they're just starting up. There's lots of places like that. So hopefully our ski resorts stay strong. Luckily there was enough snow in the beginning. But I think the New York Times, if I remember correctly, said they were thinking 50% of restaurants were likely to go out. So it's already a tough industry as it is. So hopefully that's not the case here.
Is there anything that property owners should be thinking about to protect their investments? Tim, I know that you and I have talked a little bit about how downtown is right now specifically a ghost town, and there's some, risk of, without having eyes on the street, that vandalism, graffiti, that kind of stuff goes up. What else? I am just trying to think about, in a situation where maybe these properties aren't being used, that property owners should be thinking about to protect their investments.
And if I can just tack on something there, Tim, too, what do you think this is going to do to rents and property values? Do you have any idea about that, the other side of that?
Good God.
Magic ball out.
Don't know yet. I mean, the funny thing about Eugene is we're not overbuilt in areas, and so property values aren't going to drop substantially. Thinking long term, we're a pretty small, tight market as it is in all aspects, so we'll rebound well. But short term, what we've been doing in vacated spaces, for example, we've beefed up securities, patrolling buildings. Downtown, we're helping the Red Hats. They're doing a great job. And the Eugene Police is doing a fantastic job. They're spread thin all over the place, but working with them, we have guys that will go on just patrols and look for tagging, look for window breaks, probable break-ins. I've noticed the city or somebody has put some fencing up in some of the alleyways between the buildings. That's helped a ton. And we've have our doors locked longer. And talking with some of our tenants, doors, the buildings are open maybe from 10 to 3 and then locked from then on. And we've had, it's cut down on crime. We saw a lot of crime like in the first couple weeks.
Mm-hmm.
People went home. It's panned off, but I think the longer this goes, you're going to start seeing more crime. The weather getting nice, you're seeing a lot more people move downtown and pitch tents in areas where they never have before. And, you know, as we have learned, you know, the city's alive of about 1,200 people at night. It's a whole different city town at night. And I'm nervous about that for the buildings, but it seems to pan off for the moment. I think the police are doing a really good job.
Yeah.
But you know, if everybody starts looking at other properties, we've notified other owners of properties too that we've just had guys, you know, looking at their properties at different times. And so if they see, you know, these are 18-year-olds displaced seniors in high school that we've given them jobs to just go around, not get in harm's way, call 911, call the Red Hats. But and honestly, we've had where their presence has been the best is with elderly customers of the buildings that are scared to go in the elevator, scared to go in the lobbies, but somehow they have a doctor's appointment. They have to see their attorney or their accountant. And they wipe down the elevator each time they use it. They wipe down the door handles. You know, perception is everything. So making them feel safe is the key.
Yeah, you were telling me about that. I think that's really awesome as a property owner that you guys are keeping that in mind too, that if there are folks coming in and out. I know from the chamber's perspective, and this seems like a no-brainer, but you know, we own our property, and so I've been trying to make sure that myself or someone else on my staff drives by at least a couple times a week. Our building is completely shut down, and we don't have a property management company, so we're trying to just make sure that we keep an eye on things as best as possible. On the issue with the police and the vandalism, we have been reaching out and continuing our advocacy around public safety, and specifically in this time, what we're hearing is that some of these minor kind of incidents are not being reported. So if you're having windows broken, if you're having vandalism, tagging, whatever, call it in, because what they need is a record of where these things are getting bad so they can be deploying resources. They are ready and willing to do it. They actually have redeployed a couple new police officers downtown who were resource officers for the schools, which are closed right now. And so they've been able to kind of repurpose some of those downtown, which has been really good. That's happened within the last week. So they're on it, we're on it, trying to make sure that this is something that's being taken care of. So even if it feels minor, just call it in, just let them know it happened. So again, they can start tracking that and really start to deploy folks wherever that's needed. Well, we are right at 1 o'clock here, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time, including your twos. And I really, really appreciate you kind of stepping up and having this hard conversation. I think the pieces that I want to take away are, one, if you're a tenant, you have to proactively reach out and indicate that you need help, you need deferment, whatever it is, and document why that is. Make sure to do it in a written form, as well as probably picking up the phone and just having a compassionate conversation. And the other piece is just, we're all in this together. The landlords, the property owners, the tenants, everybody's just in a really shitty spot right now. And so just trying to do what we can to have compassion for people, I think is the best place that we can all be. So unless you guys, do you have any closing comments or thoughts?
No, you said it right there.
Good.
Absolutely right.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you, Pablo. Hirschner Hunter has been an incredible supporter of our chamber right now, and really appreciate the services you're providing. Tim, thank you as always. Another big supporter of the chamber and us of you guys as well. So appreciate it. For everybody who's still on, we have another webinar this upcoming Monday. We're shifting gears just a little bit. We're going to be talking to you guys about how to be managing and doing communication and just leadership in this kind of weird work from home time. We have a leadership consultant coming on to talk about best practices and how you manage the people side of all of this. I know our staff has been continuing some of our leadership development through this time, and it's been really helpful to sort of step away from the crisis for a few minutes and really think about how are we developing our staff? How are we making sure we're keeping communication open and making sure the business is still running well? So I hope you'll join us on Monday at noon. We'll have more information out on social media and via email this weekend. And everybody have a wonderful weekend. It's beautiful out there.